Take command, Logan Paulson there, Craig Hoffman here as we answer your mailbag questions. If you'd like to submit them, you can go to hoffmanshow.com. Use the contact link. You can also send us a message on Instagram at Logan_Paulson82 or at Hoffman.sports. This one came in the inbox, Logan, from Justin. He said, "Hi, Craig. I would love to have a greater understanding of the type of athlete/skill set that Kingsbury is looking for on the offensive line. Schematically, how does the offensive line work on the running game?" So I think the big one that I would like to tackle is the first part of Justin's question. Maybe we do an entire episode on run game stuff eventually. But as we head towards Indianapolis next week and the draft, and we're doing all these mock drafts and all that kind of stuff, when you look at Kliff and also Bobby Johnson, like what are they looking for, you think, in an offensive lineman? Have you been able to tell yet?
Yeah, I think I'm kind of working through that still a little bit. I think I look at the two guys that they brought in. Bobby Hart is kind of a bigger body. He's like 340 pounds. He's like 6'5". And then obviously the gentleman we talked about when we did our draft review is Amin Dakwa, who's, he's 360. Those are big dudes in the NFL. And, Dakwa's like 6'8". And again, you're always chasing body types, you're always chasing development, but in terms, this is where it gets a little bit funny because people say, oh, well, now you go find the biggest offensive lineman in the draft and you insert them into this system. That's not exactly how that would work, right? And obviously big offensive linemen are valuable in the type of system that they run. They run a little bit of tight zone. They run a lot of zone read, like where you're kind of going downhill. It's going to play and feel to the defense like duo, right? We're not going anywhere. We're trying to move guys off the spot. And obviously getting big explosive guys are very helpful with that. And so I think those two additions kind of reflect that. You know what I mean? They reflect that type of mentality. However, they also run a lot of what I would call bounce or what I would counter, like these power schemes where you have to have the offensive lineman pull. And while they don't need to be as straight up, ballerina athletic as like an outside zone team, for example, they do need to have some level of athleticism. So you're looking for kind of this, again, a good offensive lineman is a paradox, right? It's someone who's incredibly physical and big, but also has some ability to move and be functional in space. And so that's, to me, is I think where it's, if I was going to give it a name, right? They want a bigger body who can pull and help them attack the perimeter. And I think when you look at Sam Cosmi is a really interesting example, kind of an undersized guard, relatively speaking, when you look around the NFL, but he gives them a lot of flexibility in terms of how they run screens, how they get to the perimeter. Even Wiley, for all of his shortcomings, I think he had a really good year this year because you can run tackle trap, you can run screens to his side, you can get on the perimeter and get that stuff done. And we talked about this earlier in the year, Cornelius Lucas is, I think, a really good pass protector. But I think early in the season when he was playing a lot, he really, I think, hurt their ability to kind of run screens, run tackle traps, run bounce where he's got to pull because he's not that fleet of foot. And when you look at Brandon Coleman, again, he's a bigger, wider body guy. He's 325 pounds. He's 6'4", but he has this tremendous foot speed. And I think when you look at what they did in Arizona, right, Humphreys was a guy that, again, was a heavier guy. He was in that 320 range, maybe 330, but he's 6'4". He's a little sawed off, but can run and get in space. And so I think that's kind of what you're looking for, is kind of a thick lower half guy, guy with big legs, kind of a big trunk, but can help you with some of this movement stuff. And so that's where you're not looking for the biggest dude you can find. You're looking for a guy that's kind of that wrestler movement skill, but also has the ability to run an effective gap scheme run.
Yeah, but I think of some of the best offensive linemen in the league, and certainly the best guy that I covered, the best guy you played with was the same guy. It was Trent, right? Yeah. Trent's enormous. He is, 6'3", 6'4", 335 pounds?
I mean, he would fluctuate between, 355 and, there were times where he cut down to 325, but that's a big dude. He's a heavy, strong, functionally strong guy. And I think and again, he's a kind of a tough example because he's the best offensive lineman I've ever seen play. You know what I mean? But right. That's kind of the body type.
But what made him that was he had that body type and then could move. And I remember, Trent, I actually did a story once on Trent Williams' feats of athleticism. And I just went around the locker room and asked a bunch of different guys, what's the craziest thing you've ever seen Trent do? And Adrian Peterson was on the team at the time. And obviously they go back to Oklahoma together. And, he was one day we were in the gym, and this is Trent at this point isn't, Trent's not a guy who's like super cut up. You look at him and you're like, that's the best athlete I've ever seen. And you're like, no, seriously, that's the best athlete I've ever seen. But he was even like doughier, if you will, his freshman year at Oklahoma. And Adrian told me that he just stood under the rim in the basketball gym and from a standstill, not even from like on the run, did like a 360 between the legs dunk.
Dude. I remember he was in slides when he was 350. He was big. And we went to the gym to do our walkthrough. He's in slides, like sock slides, like totally not athletic footwear, and did like a freaking like tomahawk dunk off of a vert. Like he just was one of the most, like he covered punts in college. Like he is a freak athlete.
Yeah.
Like, and his ability to move in space, like, and
the last thing I was going to say is his ability to hit in space.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing, is it's not just like, can you get out and can you get a big locomotive moving? It's, do you have the agility to then hit a little guy in space? Because I remember talking to Trent, and Trent told me the hardest thing I have to do is not stand there and block like a Myles Garrett or whatever. It's when I get out on those pulls and everyone's thinking I'm going to go get someone. You got this little 180-pound guy that wants to juke you. Can I actually hit him? Can I actually bury the corner in the way that I'm expected to do? And he said, that's the hardest thing I had to do. And so that's the hard part, right? Is you need big man, the ability to move in little space.
Well, dude, I'm telling you, like everyone talks about, you just make a cut up a Trent blocking in space, like his ability to close the distance, come to balance, and explode through his hips. Like he looks like a linebacker when he does it, or like a fullback. You know what I mean? He's that explosive. And so obviously, like that's the gold standard of movement at the position. Like, he ran like a 4.78 or 4.79 at the combine. I think he was like 320 at the time. Like he's a crazy athlete, right? But then you get like, again, go through your top tackles. Like that's what you're looking for. And the reason
I was going to say Mailata was the other guy I was thinking of like crazy big movement skills are outrageously good.
I mean, Tristan Wirfs, Penei Sewell, like there's a reason those guys are the top 8 guys in the NFL, right? Is because they can do all the things. They don't limit your offense in any way from an athletic standpoint. They can pass protect, they can run, they can get to the second level, they can get out on the screen. Like, and that's why that guy is so valuable. Like, I was actually talking to somebody who I have a lot of respect for as an offensive play caller. And I said, why is Kyle Shanahan having such a hard time right now calling plays? And he's like, they rely on the left tackle so much. And he's a playmaking element in their offense because of, you can slide protections away. You can, get him out on screens. You can pull him. You can trap him. You can rely on him to take 2 and get to the second level. And so when you get in that top threshold of offensive linemen, like you turn on the film, man, and it impacts a game. And so obviously, like that's the extreme version of that. There's nobody in this draft class that moves like those guys, right? That can do that.
No. But
you want to find a mold of a guy who brings a little bit more size, a little bit more density, and a little bit, and you don't want to lose the movement skill, right? I'm trying to think of a good example. Like, for example, like I think of Orlando Brown all the time because he's this massive guy. He's 360. He's pretty good in pass pro, but he kills your offense from a run game standpoint. He just kills it. Now, a lot of teams are okay with that because of his ability to pass protect. I don't think Kliff is okay with that. I don't think this offense is okay with that. You need someone who's got that size, not 360, but that 320 to 340 kind of range that can run and get to the second level. Where, like, talking about draft, like guys like Jalen Travis from Iowa State, he's 6'7", he's 345, he's got long arms, he's got decent movement skills. Like even him, I'm like, are you good enough to do it? The guy that really sticks out to me, if you want like a just someone that I was like, this guy could be a commander, not from a work ethic standpoint, so get that out of your mind right now, but from a snap movement skill standpoint, is Anthony Belton from NC State. He's like 6'5", he's 345, he's got long arms, he can run a little bit. Now he's all over the place from technique standpoint, but if you just look at the athlete, I think that's kind of the model of what you're looking for. A guy that can play inside, outside, gives you some flexibility on the O-line. But that body type to me is like perfect. He can pull, he can block on a screen, and you don't really lose any juice. But he's still got this big body that can move people in gap scheme runs.
For sure. I feel like this is a good follow-up from Brian that we should tack onto this part of the pod. Brian asks, when evaluating linemen on either side, how tall is too tall? You sometimes see these guys at 6'8" or 6'9", and I wonder how they're going to get leverage on anyone. Is there such a thing as too tall, or is bigger always better, all else being equal?
Yeah, I mean, there are offensive linemen that are too tall, because they can't bend. And so when you're talking offensive line play, it's really, you're talking athletes. Like, so the guy that you want to play basketball is the guy you want to play offensive line. And I know that sounds like a contradiction, but that's kind of the movement skills you want. Like, like everyone did that, like, house basketball league where they pound the floor, they bend in their hips and they do the side shuffles. Essentially, that's what offensive line play is. So the guys that are bad at that are the guys that bend at the waist, their chest is facing the floor. And usually those really, really tall guys have a hard time bending at the hips, bending at the knees, keeping a vertical torso, right? And being able to sink and rise on contact because they're just so damn tall. So that's why Joe Alt, for example, is a total outlier because he's pretty bendy in the hips, pretty bendy in the knees, pretty bendy in the ankles, and while also being very tall. Like there's a bunch of tall guys in this year's draft class, like Ozzie Trapillo from Boston College. He's 6'7". He's got 33-inch arms. He's a good football player. He might be a starting right tackle in the NFL, but the thing that makes you worried is he just can't bend enough. So like at contact, his helmet is always higher than the defender's helmet. So he's going to get stoned in the run game. In pass pro, if someone's got a really aggressive rip move, you can't reach down and touch that guy, right? And so to me, like the kind of sweet spot for, like, obviously there's outliers. There's outliers,
Right. Mailata's 6'8".
Yeah, like there's outliers, but Mailata is a unicorn athlete. Right. The way
he grew up playing rugby in Australia. Yeah. Like he literally grew up playing a different sport with the different movement skills that required a lot more movement skills than the shuffling that we think of for an offensive lineman.
Yeah. And so he's like watching him warm up, like, shoot, he could play tight end, man. Like that's how he moves. Right. And I think that's ultimately what you're looking for. So obviously there's like a sweet spot of that movement, which is like, to me, it's like 6'7" and below and probably above 6'2" or 6'3", right? Usually those 6'2", 6'3" guys have shorter arms. So it's maybe 6'4" to 6'7". It's kind of that sweet spot. Now, you're going to find guys that fall outside of that 100%, but you're really looking for bend. And then as as guys get taller, those femur lengths get longer. It's just harder for them to move with the small. You talked about Trent. The hardest thing he's got to do is block someone in space or block a linebacker. Like that's something that those tall guys have a hard time with. And there's a guy from, his name's Lutz from North Carolina, who can move like he's 6'8". He can move like a deer. He runs. But then when he has to block at the second level and get down and sink his pads, he gets chinned all the time because he's so damn tall. Like he's movement wise, you're like, yes, but then you lose some of that girth, some of that size because it's all stretched out in this tall frame. So to me, I do think there are too tall, right? And again, if you find a 6'9" guy who, like, let's say LeBron James put on 200 pounds and played left tackle, like, you'd be pretty stoked on that, right? Because he's got the length and he can bend and do all those different things.
I mean, Jonathan Ogden's one of the greatest of all time, and he was 6'9".
Great example. But, like, when you watch him, he can just sink and bend and be athletic. And, he was I think he was like, but almost an Olympic caliber thrower in college, right? Track athlete.
Yeah.
Like, he could just get shot at all that kind of stuff. So from an explosive standpoint, it's all there. But there's a reason we can remember Jonathan Ogden 6'9". Oh, Jordan Mailata 6'9" is because those dudes who are that kind of athlete tend not to be playing football. They tend to be playing basketball, usually, right? If you can go play basketball or football and you're 6'8", 6'9", like even what's his name? DeJuan Jones, like when he was coming out from Ohio State, that he's 6'8". He said his first love was basketball, and if he could play basketball, he'd be playing basketball. But you just get bigger, and it's like, okay, you're a good athlete, but we got to move you to offensive line because you're so damn big. So there's a reason that all those guys just in the American sports system don't show up a lot here because the better athletes are playing different sports.